Chanukah Tova, everybody. Now, I'm not celebrating tonight because, according to the biblical calendar, Hanukkah does not begin until the 18th of December. And if you want a link to the website which shows the new moon every month, I can give you that link. Anyway, this is the menorah that I'm going to be using to celebrate Hanukkah with, and that's when, as it worked out, that's when I'm going to be lighting the first candle. And so instead of lighting the first candle on the third night, I'll be lighting it on the first night. So that worked out for the Woman in the Wall, Woman of the Wall campaign. And by the way, this is a menorah that my mom got in the 1980s at a co-worker's party. Well, the co-worker had invited her to the party, so I don't know whether it was a co-worker's party, but she was invited, and she got this menorah, and I was able to clean it recently, and I have a blog entry on that, so I'll post a link to the blog entry. And I mean, it's just amazing. There are so many issues going on today, and in terms of when you just read what's going on in the world, I mean, even with, correct me if I'm wrong, the number in Pakistan, what I call occupied India, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, 84 children murdered by the Taliban. And I mean, that kind of stuff, no matter where a person is in the world, is not supposed to happen during Hanukkah or during Christmas or during any time that's supposed to be a time that is good and holy. And by the way, the makeup thing here, because I was originally going to keep my glasses on, so I might as well do that. And I mean, it's just amazing all that's happening. And I mean, how else do I describe it? We live in a very corrupt world, very dark world, and this is why one of the names for this season is the season of light, because I mean, we are in such a dark world. I mean, yeah, miracles have happened. For example, one of the news items that came out today: immigration rebuke, federal judge rules Obama's actions unconstitutional. I mean, that's you know, a miracle that the judge is saying that someone who leads his own nation has to follow the laws of it. And there are other miracles, but there's also a lot of bad news. For example, the Obama administration tries to play rep as showdown brews at the UN over Israel, and the so-called Palestinians are trying to end the so-called occupation. There should be no refereeing or any other intermediary between Israel and the so-called Palestinians. The Israelis who are in Israel have the right to Israel, and so do those of us who are in the diaspora, whether or not anyone likes it. And just even reading the language of this article, the article states, a showdown is brewing at the United Nations over a push by Palestinian officials and their allies to formally demand Israel withdraw from the West Bank and East Jerusalem within 2 years, leaving the Obama administration scrambling to stake out its position and ease tensions. And then the article goes on and it talks about, well, actually, let me read that part. It says, Palestinian officials originally said the resolution will be submitted for a possible vote Wednesday. Today is Tuesday, by the way, so obviously Wednesday is the first morning of Hanukkah, for when most people are celebrating it. But with the U.S. likely to veto, that vote may be postponed. Secretary of State John Kerry on Tuesday urged against anything that interferes or might be perceived as interfering in Israeli elections planned for March. The priorities, he said, should be halting growing Israeli-Palestinian violence and creating conditions for an eventual resumption of peace talks. There should be no issue about it, and it shouldn't have to do with the elections in Israel. It should do with the so-called Palestinians have almost 23 states that they can choose from, and they have Arabia, what's now called Saudi Arabia. They have Saudi Arabia that they can go to. They have Mecca, they have Riydah, they have what they could have if they wanted. It's all, we have only Jerusalem, and I mean right now we're a pretty small nation, and if the greater Islam theorists are correct, if there is this whole larger, for lack of a better term, border plan or border blueprint, then Israel should be much bigger than it is right now, and we're not even at the size that we should be at. And I'd have to look back to see what Torah means when it talks about expanding to the Great Sea, which is obviously the Mediterranean Sea, but then it talks about expanding all the way to, as far as I recall, even the Euphrates. So I'd have to check, because different maps give different blueprints or border plans, and so the point being, there should be no issue about who Jerusalem and the West Bank and any other, for lack of a better term, any other land or entity within Israel belong to. Israel is Israel's, and Jerusalem is Israel's, and if the so-called Palestinians don't like it, then that's an issue that they need to take up with God. And also for those who support the so-called Palestinians, they also need to take up the issue with God. Instead of bombing children, instead of teaching children to hate Jews, instead of doing all the other stuff they're doing. And also, as has been shown, trying to, for example, for lack of a better term, trying to hold up cafes and to hold people captive is not going to end well, because look at that Iranian jihadist who got killed in the end, and after he murdered 2 people. And so ultimately God's will is going to prevail. And again, if the so-called Palestinians and their supporters have a problem with that, they need to take it up with God.